Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Destiny and today we are making a very simple plaid skirt. I am so excited to share this with you guys because this tutorial is truly so simple. So if you are a beginner with little experience or you're just looking for a quick 30-minute project, this tutorial is for you. Before we get started, let's talk a little bit more about this skirt we'll be making. It is a straight skirt as opposed to being an A-line skirt, so instead of working with a taper, we're just going to be working with a simple rectangle. It also features an elasticized waistband as well as a reinforced frayed hem. The skirt I'll be making today is a maxi skirt, however you ultimately get to decide the length of your skirt, so it can definitely be shortened if you're wanting something more midi-sized. To get started, let's gather up our supplies. You'll need a sewing machine, preferably one with a zigzag stitch if you don't plan on using a serger. I will be using a serger in this tutorial, but we'll go over how to apply a zigzag stitch in the event that you don't have one. You'll also need an iron and an ironing board. Since we're making a plaid skirt, you'll obviously need plaid fabric, which we'll discuss more about in a minute. You'll need 1-inch wide elastic for the waistband, as well as a safety pin to help pull it through. Other supplies include pins, a measuring tape, scissors, and an optional marking tool, ruler, and glue stick. Let's talk more about the fabric real quick because this part is very important if you're wanting to achieve the same frayed look. When picking out fabric, make sure it's a true woven plaid fabric. By this, I mean that the fabric is plaid on both sides as opposed to being just printed onto one side. Woven plaids will have an edge like this. This is called a selvage. A selvage is basically a self-finished edge that prevents the fabric from unraveling, and that's what we'll be using as the hem for our skirt. The fabric I'm using today is a brushed cotton plaid fabric, which I will link below. This medium weight fabric can often be found in widths of 44 and 60 inches. For reference, I'm 5'7" and the 44-inch wide fabric is more than enough. If you're taller, you may opt for the 60-inch. Now the yardage will depend on your waist size. Whatever your waist size is, multiply that by 2, and that's about how much fabric you'll need. I always round up a little. For example, if your waist size is 30 inches, then you'll need about 60 inches of fabric. So purchasing 2 yards of fabric would be plenty. Like always, be sure to wash your fabric before you start sewing to account for any shrinkage that may occur. To begin, we'll start by cutting out a simple rectangle. As mentioned previously, the long side of our rectangle will be approximately our waist size times 2. This will also include our seam allowance. One of the perks to working with plaids is that you have lines to use as guides. My waist size right now is roughly 30 inches, so I'll be cutting a rectangle that is about 60 inches long. However, if I can find 2 lines in my fabric that are even close to 60 inches apart, I'm just going to use those as my cut lines. I want to make this process as easy and simple as possible. I'm also not entirely concerned about matching my plaids. If you would rather just use a marking tool and ruler, that is completely fine as well. The same idea can be applied to finding the length of our skirt. This will be considered the short side of our rectangle. Since we'll be using the selvage as the bottom of our skirt, we should only be thinking about one cut line right now. There are a couple different ways to figuring out the length, but before I continue, keep in mind that whatever your desired length is, you must add an additional 1 3/4 inches to be able to make a casing. The easiest way is to simply hold up the fabric in the mirror and make a mental note of where you would like your skirt to start and end. If there happens to be a line on the fabric that you can use as a guide, go for it. If you don't feel comfortable with this method, then you can always use a measuring tape to measure from your waist down to where you would like the bottom of your skirt to end. If, for instance, this number you chose is 38 inches, then you must measure 39 3/4 from your selvaged edge. You can also use a marking tool and ruler if you would like. Personally, I'm going with ease, so I'm kind of just letting the lines on my plaid dictate the length of my skirt. Once you've figured out where you want your 3 cut lines to be, go ahead and cut your fabric. For step 2, we must finish the edges that we just cut. This prevents our fabric from unraveling. You can either do this on a sewing machine or a serger. If you're using a sewing machine, it must be capable of doing a zigzag stitch. You simply sew a zigzag as close to the edge of your fabric as possible. It would look similar to this. Personally, I'm just going to be using my serger. The next step is easy. Fold your fabric in half, right sides together, and sew. Typically with this type of fabric, there is no wrong or right side since it looks pretty much the same on both sides. Just pick a side and stay consistent. If you're using the optional glue stick, this is where it comes in handy. While I'm not concerned about my plaids necessarily matching, I would still like for my lines to match up. To prevent my fabric from sliding around, I like to add a tiny amount of glue to the edges before pinning in place. This is called glue basting, and as long as you let your glue dry, it really shouldn't have any negative effect on your machine. The glue I'm using is just a basic acid-free washable glue stick. You can buy a 12-pack of these for less than $4. Starting at the bottom, I'm going to apply a small amount of glue to my edge. Then I'm going to fold over my fabric, match up the lines as close as I can, and pin everything into place. I like to do this step a little at a time until I reach the end. Once everything is pinned, it's time to sew. A lot of times when I sew, I like to use the right edge of my presser foot as my guide. Depending on your machine and your machine's settings, this will often result in either a 3/8 inch or 5/8 inch seam allowance. For this project, it really doesn't matter what you choose, as long as you're consistent. Once you've sewn up your side, be sure to press your seam open. I like to use a scrap piece of fabric for this part to prevent any glue from sticking to my iron. For this next step, we'll be making a casing. To do so, make sure your skirt is still flipped inside out. You should be able to see the finished edges of your seam. Simply begin by folding the top edge over about 3/8 of an inch. I find that it's easiest to start this at the seam. Do this little by little, using your measuring tape or ruler to ensure accuracy. Press and pin into place. Once you've done that, do the same thing but fold your new edge over 1 3/8 inches. Press and reposition your pins. When you are done, your project should look similar to this. You should have plenty of space to fit your elastic as well as a row of stitches since we'll be stitching this shut in a second. For this part, I like to set my stitch length to 3 or 3.5, but that's optional. In the event that I mess up and need to remove a few stitches, having a longer stitch length just makes removing stitches a little easier. Starting about a 1/2 inch in front of our seam, we're going to sew our casing close. An easy way to do this is to make sure the pinned edge of your casing remains to the left side of your presser foot. You should stitch as close to this edge as you can to ensure that you have plenty of space to fit your elastic. Go nice and slow and don't forget to backstitch. As we approach the end, we'll want to make sure that we stop about 1 inch in front of where we began. This will allow us space to feed our elastic through. For this last step, we'll be adding elastic. Whatever your waist size is, subtract 1 inch. As mentioned previously, my waist is 30 inches, so I will be cutting a piece of elastic that is 29 inches long. I always like to stretch my elastic a little before I cut. Next, we'll place a safety pin at the end of our elastic. This works best with larger safety pins, but a standard size safety pin will work too. I'm going to feed this elastic through, starting in front of my seam. This part right here can get a little bulky, and I find that pushing the elastic through at the beginning makes this process a little easier. Go slow and be careful not to let your pin open up while you're pulling your elastic through. As the end of my elastic begins to shorten, I like to take an additional safety pin and fasten it to my project so it doesn't accidentally get pulled through. Once you've completely pulled your elastic through, make sure the elastic is not twisted and is laying completely flat throughout your casing. I always like to do a fit check before sewing my elastic together. To do this, I overlap the two ends over about 1/4 to 1/2 inch and fasten with a safety pin. If you're happy with this fit, go ahead, remove the safety pin and sew. For this part, I like to sew back and forth a couple of times to ensure my elastic won't come undone. Once the elastic has been sewn, we need to sew the casing close. Take your project, find the opening and pull it flat. Sew as close to the edge as possible. If you guys have been following along, your project should look similar to this. A straight line plaid skirt with an elasticized waistband and a reinforced frayed hem. This project is truly one of my favorites, not just because of ease, but because of how simple and timeless the fit is. It's a wardrobe staple, and I feel it looks great on all body types. Dress it up, dress it down, wear it all year round, you know? If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to tag me at Spoolspell. I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Threads. I would love to see what you guys make. Thanks so much, guys. Bye.